Friends, imagine a leader who fears peace more than war, a leader who has lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, who has drained his country's economy, who stands isolated on the world stage, and yet when offered a secret peace deal, a deal that would let him keep land, block Ukraine from joining NATO, and declare victory to his people, he says no. Tonight, we're going inside the mind of Vladimir Putin and uncovering why he cannot end this war, even if it destroys Russia in the process. Friends, welcome to the channel. Tonight, we're not just talking about tanks, trenches, and front lines. We're talking about something deeper, darker, more dangerous. We're talking about a war that refuses to end, a war that began as a special military operation, was supposed to last a few days, and is now dragging into its fourth year. On one side, we see a Russia that is bleeding, sanctioned, exhausted, cut off from much of the world. On the other, we see a Ukraine that was supposed to collapse in 72 hours, but still stands, still fights, still raises its flag over cities that were meant to be erased from the map. But the real mystery isn't how this war started. The real mystery is why it won't stop. Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers. We'll look at the political, economic, psychological, and global forces trapping Putin inside this war. We'll see why peace for him is not an exit. It's a death sentence. So sit back, put on your headphones, and let's step into a story that will change how you see this war, how you see Russia, and how you see power itself. Picture this. It's February 2022. Cold air, dark skies, columns of Russian armor rumble across the border into Ukraine. Missiles streak through the night toward Kyiv. Helicopters race toward Hostomel airport. Russian paratroopers drop from the sky, aiming to seize the gateway to the capital. The plan is simple, terrifying, and in the Kremlin's mind, inevitable. Cripple Ukraine's air defenses, paralyze its leadership, force its president to flee or surrender, install a puppet government. In Moscow, they believe Kyiv will fall in days, maybe 3, maybe less, because this was never just about Donbass or defending Russian speakers. This was an attempt to erase Ukraine as an independent state. Putin wasn't fighting for a sliver of land. He wanted control of the entire country, its government, its identity, its future. But something happened that his generals, his spies, and perhaps even he himself did not expect. Ukraine said no. Ordinary people picked up weapons. Civilians blocked roads with their bodies. Volunteers lined up at recruitment centers. The president, instead of fleeing, recorded a video in the streets of Kyiv and said, "I am here." The invasion stalled. Convoys got stuck. Russian troops faced fierce resistance and logistical chaos. The 3-day plan collapsed under the weight of reality. And in that moment, Vladimir Putin faced a choice: admit failure or double down. He chose the second. He declared 4 Ukrainian regions part of Russia forever. That word, forever, was not a negotiation. It was a trap he walked into himself. Because once you say forever, how do you ever step back? To understand why Putin can't stop, we have to understand what he fears most. It's not NATO tanks. It's not Western sanctions. It's not even losing territory. What he fears is a successful, independent, democratic Ukraine right next door. For over 2 decades, Putin has told his people a story. He said, democracy doesn't work here. Western influence brings chaos. Strong, centralized power is the only way to keep Russia stable. But imagine this. In a neighboring Slavic country, people vote, protest, criticize their leaders, and the system survives. The economy grows, institutions reform, the country moves closer to the European Union. That is not just an annoyance for Putin, it's a direct threat to his rule. Because if Ukraine proves that democracy can work in a country with a shared history, culture, and language, millions of Russians will start asking, if they can do it, why not us? A thriving Ukraine would be a mirror showing Russians what they could have had, what was taken from them. For Putin, that is unacceptable. So instead of letting that example grow, he chose war. He wants to turn Ukraine not into a model, but into a warning. Now, let's leave the front lines and walk into Russia's factories. Listen, you hear machines roaring, workers hammering metal, assembly lines moving nonstop. At first glance, it looks like economic activity, production, jobs, movement, but look closer. Those factories are no longer making cars or farm equipment or home appliances. They're making tanks, artillery shells, drones, missiles, In 2024, around 1 in every 3 rubles of Russia's federal budget went to defense and security. By 2025, estimates push that toward almost half of all federal spending. Nearly half of the country's money is being poured into war. That doesn't create prosperity. It creates dependence. Because all of this output, these shells, vehicles, rockets, is designed for one thing: to be destroyed. Every missile that explodes over Ukraine is money turned into smoke. Every tank burned on the battlefield is weeks of labor erased in seconds. And yet, inside Russia, entire regions now rely on this destruction to survive. Towns that once produced civilian goods are now bound to the war machine. Workers receive bonuses for higher military output. Local officials boast about record defense production. So what happens if the war ends tomorrow? Contracts vanish. Factories shut down. Workers lose their income. Regional budgets collapse. The illusion of stability under sanctions falls apart. Peace is not just a political risk, it's an economic earthquake. Putin's system has turned war into a business model. And once your economy is addicted to conflict, peace becomes dangerous. Now let's step into the Kremlin. Marble halls, gold-trimmed ceilings, long tables where men in suits sit very straight, very still. Here, something more subtle but just as deadly is happening. In a normal government, bad news travels upward. It's painful, it's awkward, but it's necessary. In a dictatorship built on fear, the opposite happens. Generals, ministers, and advisors have learned a hard rule: never be the one who brings the bad news. If you report a defeat, you might be demoted. If you admit a mistake, you might be investigated. If you expose corruption, you could fall accidentally from a balcony or be found suicided in your office. So people adapt. They start changing the numbers. Just a little at first, adjusting casualty figures, rounding up production statistics, turning failures into temporary setbacks. Battlefield reports become fantasy novels. Maps are colored for morale, not accuracy. A town 20% controlled is reported as almost fully liberated. A stalled offensive is described as advancing according to plan. A disastrous loss is labeled a tactical regrouping. Even pro-war Russian bloggers, people who support the invasion, openly mock these official briefings. They call them fiction. They share videos from the front that contradict the rosy picture painted on TV. But inside the Kremlin, those dissenting voices rarely reach the boss. Vladimir Putin sits at the end of a long table and listens to carefully filtered reports. He sees colored maps, charts, slides, all telling him the same story. We're doing well. Time is on our side. Just keep going. After years of this, the leader becomes trapped in his own illusion. He lives in a manufactured reality, surrounded by men who survive by telling him what he wants to hear. And when you believe you're winning, why would you stop? There's another player in this story standing in the background of almost every scene: China. Before the war, Russia's economy was deeply connected to Europe. Oil, gas, trade, investment. After the invasion, much of that vanished. Sanctions bit down, European markets closed their doors. And into that vacuum stepped Beijing. Today, a huge share of Russia's imports, from vehicles and electronics to industrial machinery and critical components, comes from China. Chinese companies help keep Russian factories running. Chinese buyers take in discounted Russian oil. Chinese goods flood Russian markets. On the surface, Putin sells this as a strategic partnership without limits. But look closely, it's not an equal partnership. It's dependency. China has every interest in keeping Russia weak enough to depend on Chinese trade, isolated enough to have nowhere else to turn, strong enough to keep the West distracted. Does China want Russia to collapse? No. That would be risky and unpredictable. Does China want Russia truly strong and independent? Also no. A strong, independent Russia would be harder to control. So what does China want? A Russia that is always in need. And what guarantees that need? An ongoing war, a permanent crisis. Even if Putin wakes up one day and thinks, maybe it's time to end this, he knows that peace would reduce Russia's leverage and increase its vulnerability to Beijing. He's not just trapped by the West, he's tied to the East. Now, let's zoom in on the people around Putin. Ministers, governors, generals, oligarchs. Imagine waking up every morning and checking your phone to see if your name is trending for the wrong reason. Dismissed, investigated, missing, dead. We've seen mysterious deaths, oligarchs falling from windows, officials found suicided hours after being fired, businessmen dying in bizarre accidents. Whether every case is political or not almost doesn't matter. The message is clear: if you fall out of favor, you disappear. Fear keeps everyone in line. No one wants to be the one who signs a document suggesting retreat, or writes a memo recommending compromise, or tells Putin, we can't win this. So they support escalation, more mobilization, more spending, more repression, because as long as the war continues, they have a role, they have influence, they have protection, End the war, and suddenly someone has to be blamed. Who lost this war? Who wasted this money? Who gave those orders? In systems like this, peace often comes with purges, and everyone in the inner circle knows it. So they cling to war, not out of patriotism, but out of survival instinct. Beyond ministries and boardrooms, the war's cost is written on people's faces. Mothers in small towns, waiting for news that never comes. Wives standing in cold lines outside military offices, asking about unpaid salaries. Missing husbands, unanswered reports. Veterans return from the front, some missing limbs, some missing friends, all missing the version of themselves that left. Many were paid more at the front than they ever could earn at home. Their families now depend on that money. Their towns depend on war contracts and compensation payments. What happens to them if the war ends? Jobs vanish, payments dry up, support programs shrink. A country already on edge will be filled with hundreds of thousands of embittered, traumatized men, trained in violence and feeling abandoned. That's not just an economic risk, it's a security nightmare. Inside Russia, state TV tries to hide this. It shows heroic soldiers, glorious music, flags, marches, but in kitchens, in markets, in small apartments late at night, whispers spread. They said he was missing in action. They never paid what they promised. They said it was going well. So why did he come back in a box? The silence is starting to crack. But inside the Kremlin, wrapped in layers of propaganda and security, Putin cannot hear it clearly, or he refuses to. He keeps talking about destiny, history, greatness, because as long as he speaks of war, he doesn't have to speak of loss. Now we can finally answer the question we began with. Why won't Putin stop the war? Not just in a slogan, but in a full, brutal picture. Politically, peace is dangerous because a successful Ukraine exposes the lie that Russians aren't ready for democracy. Economically, peace is dangerous because the economy has been rebuilt around war production. Ending the conflict would cause instant shock and unemployment. Inside the Kremlin, peace is dangerous because it forces the truth into the open about failures, corruption, and lies that have been buried for years. Globally, peace is dangerous because it would reduce Russia's value to China and expose how dependent and weakened it has become. Personally, for Putin and his inner circle, peace is the most dangerous of all because it brings accountability. It brings the day after, the day when the flags come down. The speeches end, the soldiers return, and someone has to explain, why did so many die? For what? For which victory? And there is no speech powerful enough to cover that truth forever. So paradoxically, continuing the war feels safer to the regime than ending it. Losing slowly while claiming to be winning is safer than admitting defeat and facing the consequences. Friends, this story is not just about Russia and Ukraine. It's about the nature of power, about what happens when a system is built not on truth, but on fear and lies. Putin doesn't just fear NATO. He doesn't just fear sanctions. He fears the truth that peace would reveal, that his empire is hollow, that his system is broken, that his power rests not on strength, but on illusion. And yet history teaches us one simple lesson. No matter how long it takes, truth always returns. It returns through the cracks in propaganda, through whispered conversations between families, through soldiers who come home and tell their stories, through journalists who refuse to stay silent, through ordinary people who decide that fear is no longer enough to keep them quiet. One day this war will end, not because Putin suddenly chooses peace, but because reality will eventually overpower fear. Until that day, Ukraine keeps fighting, not just for its land, but for its right to exist. Europe is reminded that freedom is fragile. And the world is reminded that the most dangerous wars are the ones being fought to protect a lie. Friends, thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this breakdown helped you see the war from a new angle, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Because awareness is our strongest defense, and understanding is the first step toward change.